Good morning. It's Wednesday, May the 12th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. Today we have the Daily Declarations for Spiritual Warfare, another segment from the book Live Not by Lies, and then some random thoughts. And all that when I come back. Thank you. The May the 12th, you will not dwell in the wilderness. Just as I brought my children of Israel out of the barren wilderness where they wandered for 40 years, so I will not cause you to dwell in a spiritual wilderness any longer. Because you have listened to my words and have honored me with your life, I will not forsake you in the wilderness, but I will lead you on the road and show you light to bring you out into the land I have promised you. I will sustain you, and as you leave the wilderness, and you will have lack of nothing. I will turn your wilderness into a pool of living water, and cause my water springs to rise up out of your dry land. I will establish my dwelling place with you, and will bless you, give you a fruitful harvest, and cause you to multiply greatly. Prayer declaration. Lord, release your living water in my dry places and create streams in the desert of my heart. Let your rivers flow into my desert places. I will not dwell in the wilderness, but will be led by you into a fruitful land. My desert shall blossom as a rose and bring forth abundant fruit. Amen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now I'm going to be reading another segment from the book, Live Not by Lies, and it's called Heresy Hunters in Our Midst. And so the last section, let's back up a little bit here and remind everybody, it was progress as religion, or what I call the cult of progress. That, again, reemphasize that the left is a cult, and it is actually a series of cults. The cult of expertise, and in this particular case, the cult of progress. Heresy Hunters in Our Midst. In 2019, I went to see the English public intellectual Sir Roger Scruton in what turned out to be the last summer of his life because of his work in the 1980s supporting dissidents in Eastern Europe. He was instrumental in helping to establish an underground university in Prague. As Britain's best-known conservative academic, he subsequently emerged as one of the most penetrating and articulate critics of what we call political correctness, in part because he has so often been its victim. Settling into his farmhouse library in rural Wiltshire, Sir Roger agreed that we are not waging a political battle, but are rather engaged in a war of religion. There is no official line in this, but it all congeals around a set of doctrines which we don't have any problem in recognizing. He explained that the emerging soft totalitarianism, any thought or behavior that can be identified as excluding members of groups favored by the left, is subject to harsh condemnation. This official doctrine is not imposed from above by the regime, but rather arises by left-wing consensus from below, along with a severe enforcement in the form of witch hunting and scapegoating. If you step out of line, especially if you're in the arena of opinion forming as a journalist or an academic, then the aim is to prevent your voice from being heard, said Scruton. So you'll be thrown out of whatever teaching position you have, or, like me recently, made the topic of a completely mendacious fabricated interview used to accuse you of all the thought crimes. Unquote. Scruton was referring to a left-wing journalist to whom he had recently granted an interview. The journalist twisted Scruton's words to make him sound like a bigot and crowed on social media that he had taken the scalp of a racist and homophobe. Fortunately, a recording of the interview emerged and vindicated Sir Roger. Many others in our time who are accused of similar thought crimes, Orwell's term for ideological offenses, are not so lucky. Well, it's not about luck. It's about smarts. Sir Roger Scruton is supposed to be a modern-day philosopher, a very sharp man, or at least was. Apparently he's passed away. And but he's too stupid to figure out that if he sits down for interviews, one of these interviewers may bite him in the ass by doing exactly what was done to him. It's his own stupid fault. You get what you deserve, as my grandmother says. This has happened to Sean Hannity. He sat down for an interview, and the interviewer twisted his words and edited the interview down to a certain segment that he could use to make Sean Hannity look bad. It was not a good faith interview. Okay, so you have to deal yourself some cards. Too many times, Republicans and conservatives are credulous. They walk into a situation going, lead me around by the nose, please. And they get led around by the nose, and then they say, gee, I got led around by the nose. How did that happen? That's simple. You're stupid. Back to the book. Scruton told me that thought crimes, heresies in other words, by their very nature make accusation and guilt the same thing. He saw this in his travels in the communist world, where the goal was to keep the system in place with minimal effort. For this purpose, there were thought crimes invented every now and then with which to trap the enemy, the people, he said. In my day, it was the Zionist imperialist conspiracy. You could be accused of being a member of that, and nobody could possibly find a defense against the accusation because nobody knew what it was. That's known as an arbitrary claim, folks. Ayn Rand identified this 50, 60 years ago. Okay, the arbitrary claim, and that you don't respond to arbitrary claims. It's just like homophobia or Islamophobia, the new thought crime, Scruton continued. What on earth do they mean? And then everyone can join in the throwing of electronic stones at the scapegoat and never be held to account for it because you don't have to prove the accusation. Well, yeah, but again, it's the same thing. If they're arbitrary claims, they mean nothing. They mean nothing. And I can go more into that later. Back to the book. The reach of contemporary thought crime expands constantly. Homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, biphobia, fatphobia, racism, ableism, and on and on and on, making it difficult to know when one is treading on safe ground or about to step on a landmine. Yet, Scruton is right. All of these thought crimes derive from doctrines, his word, that are familiar to all of us. These doctrines inform the ideological thrust behind this soft totalitarianism of our own time, as surely as Marxist doctrines of economic class struggle did the hard totalitarianism of the Soviet era. One imagines an entry-level worker at a Fortune 500 firm or an untenured university lecturer suffering through the 100th workshop on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and doing their very best not to be suspected of dissent. In fact, I don't have to imagine it at all. As a journalist who writes about these issues, I often hear stories from people, always white-collar professionals like academics, doctors, lawyers, engineers, who live closeted lives as religious or social conservatives. They know that to dissent from the progressive regime in the workplace, or even to be suspected of dissent, would likely mean burning their careers at the stake. For example, an American academic who has studied Russian communism told me about being present at the meeting in which his humanities department decided to require from job applicants a formal statement of loyalty to the ideology of diversity, even though this has nothing to do with teaching ability or scholarship. The professor characterized this as a McCarthyite way of eliminating dissenters from the employment pool and putting those already on staff on notice that they will be monitored for deviation from the Socialist Justice Party line. That is a soft form of totalitarianism. Here's the same logic laid down hard. In 1918, Lenin unleashed the Red Terror, a campaign of annihilation against those who resisted Bolshevik power. Martin Latzis, head of the secret police in Ukraine, instructed his agent as follows, quote, "Do not look in the file of incriminating evidence to see whether or not the accused rose up against the Soviets with arms or words. Ask him instead to which class he belongs. What is his background, his education, his profession? These are the questions that will determine the fate of the accused." That is the meaning and essence of the Red Terror, unquote. Also, I understand that there was an even simpler way to do it, and that was shaking somebody's hand. That if you shook somebody's hand and it was rough, then you knew they were a worker. If you shook somebody's hand and it was smooth and soft, you knew that they were not. And back to the book. Note well that an individual's words and deeds had nothing to do with determining one's guilt or innocence. One was presumed guilty based entirely on one's class, and social status. A revolution that began as an attempt to right historical injustices quickly became an exterminationist exercise of raw power. Communists justified the imprisonment, ruin, and even the execution of people who stood in the way of progress as necessary to achieve historical justice over alleged exploiters of privilege. A softer, bloodless form of the same logic is at work in American institutions. Social justice progressives advance their malignant concept of justice in part by terrorizing dissenters as thoroughly as any inquisitor on the hunt for enemies of religious orthodoxy. One of the things I was thinking about that, though, is that what's different in the United States today is that, again, they don't have any power. Back in 1917-18, after the revolution, who ran the joint? The communists. Okay, so if you tried to just ignore them or whatever, they ruled at the point of a bayonet. Okay, you risk getting shot on the spot, or worse, if there's such thing as worse than getting killed or murdered. So today they can't do that. And I'm thinking about the schools where they're trying to take students and brainwash them to believe that there's something called white privilege, and which is, I guess, the ultimate arbitrary claim. And there's something called white privilege, and that you have to analyze your whiteness and all this kind of jazz. But if I decide I don't want to go along with it, I don't go along with it. There's no consequence to not going along with this. One of the ways for me to defeat it is, there's a lot of people talked about Coca-Cola. We use Coke as an example, where they were saying, well, we got to have a boycott of don't drink Coke. Well, that's stupid. And it's stupid because if Coke, it would be smart if Coke said, you know what, we're not selling Coca-Cola to white people anymore. And all the white people in the United States said, well, screw you. We're going to boycott Coke. Okay, then it makes sense. That's not what they're doing. It's an employment thing. If you work for Coke and they figure out, again, they check your records and you've signed up to be white, right? You got that little sheet of paper at the end of your application that says that this is voluntary information for statistical purposes, and it wants to know your gender and whether or not you're white and you have a disability and all that stuff. And if you've been stupid enough to say, oh, yuck, yep, and check the box that says white or Caucasian, well, guess what? Guess where you're going to end up? In white boy school. Well, they berate you and tell you what a slob you are because you're white and you're guilty of things just because you're white, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, don't check the box. You put down there none of your business. Okay, and as a matter of fact, I had a survey that I was doing the other day, and at the end of the survey, they did that. They had these sheets where it says, what is your race, what is your sex, and etc. Now, on these particular sheets, there was nowhere on there to say refuse to state. Most of the time, when you go into a human resources and you're filling out this paperwork, there's a little box and there's a statement that says refuse to state. Check the box, and that's it. And then you sign and date the form, and that's the end of that. So I had to make it. So I put a little check mark, and then right next to it, I wrote in refuse to state. Refuse to state for my sex, refuse to state for my race. Refuse to state. It's none of their effing business. Okay. So, and this goes right back to privacy. It's one of the many things that they do. They strip you of your privacy by brainwashing you into believing that you're really no different than any other mammal on the planet. They don't have an expectation of privacy. Why should you? Okay, so don't go for that. You maintain your privacy, refuse to state. Always maintain your privacy. People will walk up and blurt things out because they expect you to reciprocate. Don't. So, that's what you do if you're with Coca-Cola. You sit down. One of the first things you can do, by the way, with Coca-Cola to turn this whole dynamic around, because right now what they're doing, the reason this kind of works and there's power is because they're taking current employees, maybe people that have worked for the company for dozens of years, and sitting them down and basically under threat of getting fired, maybe not even getting their pension, you're going to go through this whiteness class, and people just go along with it because they figure, I want my pension. And whatever I got to do to get my pension, that's what I got to do. If I got to put up with this nonsense, so be it. But one of the ways to deal with, if you want to boycott, is every right-thinking person with a degree that's thinking about going to Coca-Cola to work is in business, or maybe they're going to be in chemistry to help make new formulas and whatnot. Don't. Cross them off your list. Go to work for Pepsi. Go to work for somebody else. Another way to do it, when you're going into a company and you're not sure, you sit down with whoever it is you're interviewing with and you say, by the way, you guys aren't those one of those whiteness Nazis, are you? You're not going to be harassing me about my race and shit like that, and then putting me into some kind of a class where I've got to confess my my white crimes, or you're not going to do any crap like that, are you? Now the pressure's on them. They now have to either say, no, we're not going to do it, and see if you can get it in writing, by the way, but at least get a verbal commitment, or they're going to have to justify it. Well, yeah, I'm afraid we're going to have to do that because... Okay, and then what you can do, right, as soon as with their lame explanation, you say, you know what, I don't want to work for a company as... totalitarianistic, use whatever adjective you care to, fucked up, etc., as yours. I'm going to go work somewhere else. Have a nice day. Now, what they're doing backfires. Okay, if you wait until you get hired and then start, hey, by the way, am I going to be expected to go to one of these classes? You're screwed. Because then they're going to say yes, and if you don't, you're going to be fired. You don't want that on your record. So don't put yourself in that position. Deal yourself some cards. Okay? Like I said, the best thing to do, don't apply to Coca-Cola in the first place. You got a bachelor's degree, master's degree, you're a smart guy, or you're thinking about coming over from another company. Don't. That's where the boycott is. It's not saying, I won't drink a Coca-Cola products. That's stupid. Be smart. Okay, if you're going to do organize some sort of boycott, do it smart. So, so that's the deal with the Coca-Cola and his soft totalitarianism. And that's what I mean. Soft totalitarianism can't work. It just can't work. You have to have, and these people are bending over backwards. They're all post-Marxists. They believe that they can create socialist paradise by getting into your psyche, and they can't. The only way, really, that they can force you to do whatever they want is at the point of a bayonet. That's it. That's all there is to it. So, again, remember, you have power. You get the power to decide where you're going to go, what you're going to do, what you're going to put up with. You're a parent. You have children. They're in school. Go find out. What are they teaching my child in school? There's a lot of parents that are pulling their kids out of public school. Okay, so consider putting your kids into private school or moving to a place where a public school system that isn't teaching the crap that's being taught in your public school. Okay, take some responsibility for what's going on, because otherwise, again, you're going to reap you leave your kids to the tender mercies of these Nazis. That's basically what they are. Then you're going to suffer the consequences as well. But so will our entire society. So many people ask, what can I do? One of the best things you can do, raise your kids. Just raise them. So many parents don't even bother to raise their kids. They allow other people to do it. Teachers, peers, etc. They allow their kids to be raised by somebody else, even though they all live in the same house. It's understandable you let somebody else raise your kids if they're in a foster home for whatever reason. But they live in your house, you can afford to have them there, you feed them, you drive them to school, but you're not going to raise them. You're not going to tell them what to do, where to go, how to hang their laundry, what to think. That's ridiculous. So, back in a minute. Thank you, thank you. The one of the things I want to talk about too was that I'm forgetting about, but that everybody needs to remember, is that June 15th is supposed to be when, at least in the state of California, I don't know about the rest of the country, where we go to green. In other words, we go back to normal. We take our masks off, and we don't have to social distance. We can do what we want, when we want, how we want, et cetera, et cetera. So, that when that happens, and all the businesses open up, and all of the schools start opening up, this is going to be a completely different landscape in the United States of America, and very possibly around the world. All the people that are anarchists and whatnot are going to disappear, because all of these people that are anarchists and think of themselves and pretend and pimp about pretending to be revolutionaries at the behest of Maxine Waters are going to, they're part-time, okay? And so they're going to go back to school, and they're going to go back to work, and they're just going to start disappearing. And all of the problems associated with that, because again, what they're doing right now, and this is the reason, the intensity, this is what has alarmed me over the past year, is the intensity with which we have all of this left-wing activity, efforts to destroy our society, etc. And the reason is from Alinsky. One of his rules, I don't remember which number it was, but his rule is, never let a good crisis go to waste. And the pandemic was a big, fat, juicy crisis for them. So they're going to use this as a way of trying to get as much done socialistically as they possibly can, as fast as they can. But as soon as the jig is up, as soon as the pandemic is over, which in the state of California looks like it's going to be June 15th, then we're done with that. And there is no more crisis with which to take advantage of. Things have to return back to normal. And don't be thinking that the left is Superman. Okay, the left is tired of this too. The pressure is on the left. Remember, it's always on the left. Not you or me. It's on the left. This Coca-Cola business is a classic example where the pressure is on the left. The left is the one that's running this whole idea of whiteness, this, and white privilege and all that crapola. They're the ones that are taking advantage of, taking advantage of a crisis here, but the pressure is on them to perform, to produce. They're the ones that want socialist paradise. Me, as I like to say, they're the ones who spit on their chin. I'm just hanging out. Okay, the true conservative is not movement-oriented. You listen to Sean Hannity, he'll convince you that that you're part of a movement if you're a conservative. No, not true. Okay, we make the presumption for the status quo, and that's the way we roll. It's the left that has to produce results. Okay, so make sure the pressure stays on them. And believe you me, they're sick of it. The whole reason we have this whiteness campaign is because what ended up happening with their diversity campaign, the post-Marxists, is that all it ended up doing was damaging and hurting and psychologically crippling blacks. Okay, that's what it ended up doing. All blacks keep an eye on each other and have been doing it since this diversity campaign. Initially in the 60s, it was all about integration. We're all going to live next to each other. We're going to date. We're going to marry. We're going to work together. Kumbaya. And everything's going to be fabulous. And that's the way it started. Then the left realized they can't do that because there's no friction. There's no friction in that. So they say, how do we create friction? Diversity. So we have to resegregate society, and then we can create friction, and then we can get back on track to getting our revolution and socialist paradise and all that. So, but in the meantime, when they did this diversity thing, thinking that if we separate everybody, it's going to put all kinds of pressure on white people, it didn't. It did exactly the opposite. It removed pressure from whites. And I've said it before. As a white guy, before the Civil Rights Act, I was always under scrutiny. I was always under scrutiny. If I was talking to a Mexican, if I was talking to a black, then there would always be that one person that would come up to me and ask me if I'm an N-word lover. Okay, or a Mexican lover. What do you know? There's always that kind of a jealous, envious thing going on. All the white people were monitoring each other to make sure that we're not making friends with blacks, Hispanics, or anybody outside of our race. Post Civil Rights Act, that disappeared. The Civil Rights Act was the best thing for me as a white person, if assuming I'm white. Let's put it that way. But it was the best thing, let's put it this way, for white people. Because white people no longer had to fear being monitored. Right? Because all of the reasons for monitoring became passé and obsolete. But what happened instead now, and it would have been okay if we had been again into this, we stay with the inclusive aspects of this movement, and we all live together and marry and work together and all that stuff, and then everything is hunky-dory. But when the left comes along and says, aha, diversity, you have to have pride in your background, in your history, and whatnot, all it did was now have blacks and Hispanics looking at each other cross-eyed. Okay? Blacks, you're an Oreo. If you spend too much time hanging out with white people, you're an Oreo. Or you're an Uncle Tom. Or if you're a woman, you're bougie. The same thing is with Hispanics. If you are a Mexican and you spend too much time with whites, and it also goes into culture, if you spend too much time talking like a white person, acting like a white person, enjoying the things white people enjoy, you're no longer what they call la raza. You're not part of the race. Okay, so, and that's very restrictive. How is it that, how are you going to be able to get along in a society if everything is defined by your skin color? How are you going to be able to thrive in a multicultural society? You're not. You're going to end up restricting yourself and others. And the post-Marxist professors over in Harvard realized this, that all they had done was, it backfired. All their desire to create a socialist utopia just backfired and made things worse for minorities. Same kind of thing happened for women, and I've already discussed that, and I'll emphasize it again some other time. But so here you are, and all your efforts have done nothing but make life worse for blacks, make life worse for Hispanics, and make life better for white people. This is not supposed to happen. This can't happen. So they go back to the drawing board, and what they should have done is go back to the drawing board and realize that all their efforts fly in the face of reality, and that it's a bust, and and give up. But no. They're dedicated. They're down for the struggle. So they're going to find a way. And so that's what this new whiteness move is, to try to get white people to monitor each other again. Okay, so that your friends, if you're not, I guess it would be, if you're not talking to black people, if you're not talking to Hispanics, if you're not spending enough time communicating like blacks or Hispanics, then you're being Mr. White Privilege, and other white people are going to monitor you and then scold you. So it's not going to work. Again, flies in the face of reality. I don't have to do that. I don't have to be black to get along with blacks. I don't have to be Hispanic to get along with Hispanics. That's the reality of it. So they're wasting their time and trying to waste everyone else's time. So, back in a minute. Thank you. That brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Remember to be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and always remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.